Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Big Man Book Discussion and Community Conversation about Race. My name is Tamika Hollis. I am a project manager at the Yale School of Medicine, as well as co-chair for the Yale Veterans Network. I have the pleasure of introducing Zoë Chance, who's a senior lecturer in management at the Yale School of Management. She teaches this school's most popular class, Mastering Influence and Persuasion. Also, Tim Shea, who's the author of Big Man, An Incredible Journey from Mississippi to Hollywood. He's a former newspaper reporter and has been a staff member at Yale University since 1993.
Tim, I'm so excited to be here and get to celebrate this with you because I'm deeply inspired by you and this work. There was a quote that I heard from Tori Russell, who was one of the planners of the Ferguson uprisings, that inspired me. And what he said was, we've been shaking the bed, but not many people have gotten out of it yet. And to me, this says a lot about what it means to be woke versus being an ally. And your story of allyship, I think, is brilliant. Let's share this with people. Tell everyone how you first heard about Willie Harris.
Sure, thank you very much. So I was driving to work in February 2016. It was Black History Month. I was driving to work here at the School of Management, and I was listening to NPR, and on NPR there's a feature called StoryCorps, and I heard these two gentlemen talking on StoryCorps, and it's only about a 2-minute episode, and they were Alex Brown and his friend Willie Harris. They were both original members of the Black Stuntmen's Association in Hollywood, and like most people, I'd never heard of the Black Stuntmen's Association, and it was very interesting to talk about what they had to go through to get jobs as stuntmen back in the 60s and 70s, being black in Hollywood. And then Willie started talking about growing up in Mississippi, picking cotton on a plantation, and you could just tell by the sound of his voice that he was a very impactful and serious person with a story to tell. And when I thought about his story of growing up as a sharecropper picking cotton in Mississippi, ending up in Hollywood as one of the black stuntmen, the first black stuntman, and then eventually his story being told in the Smithsonian, I immediately knew that his story had to be told, and I knew that I was going to be the person to tell it.
It's crazy to me. How did you, we all hear about inspiring people on the radio, and we get to hear their voices and in other media, but how did you decide to be the guy who reaches out, and how did you find Willie?
Well, I mean, I used to be a newspaper reporter, and also, with the internet, you can pretty much find anybody, especially if they're registered to vote. That information is all available. So it was very easy to find him, and when I called him, he was super happy that, I was interested in his story. And, in terms of what motivated me, it was really kind of, honestly, my wife and I have 4 children, and they were all either adults or on their way to adulthood at the time. So I had more time to do something like this, and I'm super grateful to my wife because it was a huge undertaking for me to invest all the time into this. But it was just one of those things where it's like, what else are you going to do? I used to sit around and watch sports all the time. It's like, I'd rather do something productive.
It's amazing. So I also worked on a book, but it took me like 6 years and an incredible amount of pain and getting a lot of help. And you're like, yeah, what else am I going to do? I guess I'll write a book. Anyone else in the audience thinking of writing a book? Lots of us, right? And who else has published a book? Congratulations. Amazing. Had you ever written a book before?
Sort of. I wrote a guide to Fenway Park, which was designed to help people not get stuck behind a pole if you're in the grandstand at Fenway Park. So that was, baby steps, I guess you'd say. But I was an English major at Providence College. I used to be a newspaper reporter before I realized I couldn't support a large family on being a local newspaper reporter. So I came to Yale. But I think I always kind of knew that I would write a book. I just didn't know what it would be about.
It's amazing. So you hear the story of Willie Harris, and you decide, this is it. This is the person I'm going to write about and with, and this is the story that I want to tell in this next big book that I write. Can I also ask you about authorship? Like, if Willie Harris had hired you to write a book for him, maybe only his name would go on the book. But typically, if it's your idea and you're the one who's writing the words in the book, you wouldn't typically have even Willie's name on the book. You would be writing a biography rather than an autobiography. How did you decide about authorship?
So when the book was still in its, I was still writing it and I was still forming it, I was initially thinking that I would be listed as the sole author. And then my thought on that started to evolve, when I realized, there would be no book without Willie. I mean, he connected me with most of the people I interviewed. We talked weekly for 5 consecutive years. It was really a partnership. It was teamwork between him and I. And it just seemed like the right thing to do because it really was a team effort. And then I also started to think that, white people have been claiming black people's cultural contributions as their own for hundreds of years, and I didn't want to be part of that tradition.
It gets me, thank you. You've said when you and I have talked also that as you were writing the book, you weren't planning or wanting to be the face and the voice of this book. And tell us about that and also how it's happened that you are.
Sure. So, well, unfortunately, if some people have not read the book, Willie and I were working with an agent, and we were trying to get the book published by a traditional publisher, but then he passed away in November of 2021, which was very devastating for me, not just because of the loss of a friend, but because I really felt like I failed to get the book published while he was still alive. And so then I just decided I'm just going to go ahead and self-publish it. And then I had this sort of like romantic, unrealistic fantasy that because it's such a great story, that it would just, I just put it out there in the universe, and that it would just catch fire. And that didn't happen. And thankfully, I had a very sagacious mentor, Cheryl Holbrook, who works here at the communications office, and she said, if you don't promote the book, then no one else is going to do it, so you better do it. And my reluctance was because, if you just think about it, I'm a white, middle-aged guy from the Connecticut suburbs who makes questionable fashion choices, and I am not really the person who should be out there front and center talking about the black lived experience in America, since I don't have any of that experience. But I did do the research, I did write the book, I do have some knowledge about it. And so, like Cheryl said, if I don't do it, then no one's going to be out there promoting the book.
Right. And as a marketing professor, I get to meet lots of people who imagine that the product or the service or the work of art that they produce will somehow sell itself, and word of mouth just happens because of the quality of the thing. And of course, that's not how it is. And I can only imagine your feeling of discomfort to be this person, but I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you are. And in a little while, we'll get to hear Willie's voice as well. Let's talk a little bit about, can we set up Willie's work and role in Hollywood and the Black Stuntmen's Association?
Sure.
We're going to hear more about that.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot to Willie's story, starting in Mississippi, going to Chicago, to the Air Force, and then eventually being in Hollywood. And what happened was, when he got to Hollywood, he had just been released. He left the Air Force. He was discharged. And he was looking for something to do, and he just kind of like, through word of mouth, through meeting a friend and this friend, he just got to know these guys who were in this group called the Black Stuntmen's Association. And none of them really were getting jobs in Hollywood. They were just trying to get jobs in Hollywood and being denied by the establishment, which was all white stuntmen. And then so he worked with them, and they had to train themselves. They were told, you're not qualified. They said, okay, we'll go train ourselves. They trained themselves at ball fields, and they had, Los Angeles police sitting out there thinking they're some kind of Black Panther group or something, because they're jumping off bleachers and like rolling around and doing all these things. But it was really an inspiring story, the way they just didn't give up. And we're actually going to hear from someone in a moment, Alex Brown, the person I mentioned at the beginning, he was Willie's, probably his best friend in the Stuntmen, and he is going to join us. Is he ready now, Mike?
Well, he's ready to come on? Great.
Yeah.
This is, that, I had no idea that apparently white stuntmen were wearing blackface.
Blackface. Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing that really gnawed at them, is that they would just use, black makeup and paint down white stuntmen so they could double Sidney Poitier or whatever leading black man there was. And the reason why they didn't have any black stuntmen until the late 60s is because there were no black leading men before Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte. So they really didn't need them, because you only generally need them if it's a leading man. So the white stuntmen were very protective of their work, and they didn't want anybody else to get any work, and so they did whatever they had to do to prevent anyone from working.
It's crazy. So would you like to meet Alex Brown? Yes. Okay, great. And Tim is going to ask Alex some questions. I'm excited to meet him as well.
Hi, Alex.
Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Good morning. Glad to be
Hi.
here.
So, Alex, I set up the Black Stuntmen Association a little bit with the crowd. I told them, what your purpose was, how you were trying to get work as stuntmen in Hollywood and stunt women. And can you just talk to the
Yes.
group a little bit about what it was that you had to go through, being on those sets in the early days back in the 60s and 70s?
Okay. First of all, I would say it's a pleasure being here, Tim. Thanks to everybody for having me here. I'll start off with our name, Black Stuntmen's Association. At that time, a lot of the white groups didn't have any women in it themselves, but we named ourselves Black Stuntmen Association, and we later changed that because when we started this organization, we had black women in it. So the name became Black Stuntmen and Women. This is Women's Month, so we got to make sure we stay abreast of the fact that this is Black Women. This is Women's Month, so we want to completely keep that in the forefront, especially this month, because last month was the same thing. That was Black History Month. Now we into Women's Month, so we got to be cognizant of the fact that it's called Black Stuntmen and Women's Association. So we're quite honored to have women in the group with us. But like Tim had led the conversation by saying, in the 60s, it was really kind of devastating, and we fought a really kind of a tough battle breaking through the stunt world in Hollywood. And to be actually honest, we just found and made some inroads almost equally. Things haven't completely changed, but they're changing gradually, and we're doing better than we did in the 1960s. You could imagine if things were still the same, we'd be in a world of trouble. But we have made some inroads, and we are still kind of fighting the battle. But like Tim said, Willie was a giant man. He didn't mention Willie Stallions. Willie was a 6'8" basketball player for the Air Force. Willie and I became very tight, but good friends when he got in there trying to be a stuntman. But the original creator was just the opposite of Willie. His name was Eddie Smith. He was about 5'6", 5'7". Willie's 6'9". So you can imagine the disparity between the height. But Willie, Eddie's voice was like a football player on the Rams football team. However, we created this Willie Eddie did, because he was a little older than the rest of us, because he was working in the motion picture business long before a lot of us youngsters at that time came into the motion picture business. And he saw a lot of that paint down. That's what we call paint down, painting white people down to do stunts for black actors and actresses, So it kind of really irritated Eddie to the point to where he would make a lot of noise, raise a lot of hell in the motion picture business about, we need to have some equal opportunity here to have stunt people. But in organizing it, see, we really was a spinoff from the Buffalo Soldiers kind of a cavalry unit. I would imagine some of you all kind of know the history of the Buffalo Soldiers, but we were kind of a spinoff from that because we were riding in a lot of the parades and doing movies in Hello Dolly and a lot of those things when we were ready. So Eddie came up to us and said, look, all you guys is riding horses. I think we should spin off from here and start making our own way to create our own possibilities for getting jobs. So why don't we start our own Black Stuntman Association? The name wasn't Black Stuntman Association in the beginning. It was called, during that time, the Negro Association. So later we changed it to the Black Stunt Men Association. The name began with Black Stunt Men. But later on, we realized the error in our ways that we didn't want to do the same thing. So we named it Black Stunt Men and Women's Association so we could have the same opportunity for women, because we started fighting and practicing with women because we had a lot of Black actresses back there wasn't getting doubled. See, what a lot of people don't realize, that white women were still in the same predicament as we were, because cowboys during that time, there was a lot of westerns going on. So a lot of the white stunt guys were putting on wigs and dresses and doing all of the stunts for the white women. See, a lot of people weren't aware of that. We were aware of it because we know they're in just as bad a shape as we were. But we kind of led the way in the fight to get equal opportunity for all of the stunt community, women alike. When we say women, we had to set that apart because, see, the white women were set apart. They didn't think they were being affected because their husbands and kids was doubling them, so it didn't bother them. But we didn't have that same opportunity. So what we had to do was do our own by going and get prepared properly, so they wouldn't have the excuse to saying, you're not completely ready, you can't do it, you're not ready, you're not qualified. So what Eddie and myself and Willie, Ernie Robinson was the president, the first president of the Black Stuntman Association. I was the original secretary. We went out in a place called Athens Park, South Central Los Angeles. It was a park out there. We began to practice every Thursday night and every Sunday morning, practicing in the evenings. It was by a railroad track, and we had to get mattresses and boxes, and we was jumping off the side of bleachers in the park, learning how to do high falls. We had boxes that we had brought from behind grocery stores. We brought an old mattress, and the police would be sitting on the side of the railroad track looking at. During that time, it was Civil Rights March, so they had thinking we were Black Muslims. We thought we were some kind of a gang learning. We out in the park throwing punches. We jumping, wrestling, throwing people to the ground. We're doing jumping jacks. I would imagine it did look strange to people who didn't really realize here's a bunch of Black people sitting in the park every Thursday night. Because I'm saying Thursday evening because we all had jobs. So we had to come from our jobs in the evening to go out there. If you were really interested and dedicated after your work, to come out there to practice every Thursday and meet every Sunday morning to learn how to ride horses, learn how to ride motorcycles, learn how to do high falls, learn how to do everything that we thought they could reject us on. So we practiced diligently to prepare ourselves. And one of our main mottos, when we got the jobs, when we did get selected, they had a few jobs, only a few jobs for us at the time. We wanted to be prepared so nobody could say that we wasn't properly prepared to do the job when we went on the job, because the first thing that says, well, they don't know what they're doing. We don't want somebody getting hurt out there. See, stunt business is a very dangerous business. And it always says you're only as good as the person you work with. If you get hit take a car hit and you're out of place, well, of course, if we driving a car and hit somebody, they're gonna say, well, we never knew how to drive a car anyway. We had to learn how to drive cars, we had to learn how to race, all in a short period of time to get this thing done so we could go and present ourselves properly so we'd be at least acceptable in the motion picture business. Now, grant you, this was not a very easy fight, and it still continues today for especially women. This women's month, I keep that in the forefront of my mind today because I'm gonna have to do some of the interviews today regarding Women's Month. But I'm saying that when we were out there doing these things, we had to be prepared. So we went all the way to the EEOC, went to all of the major studios. I saw more presidents at studios and more attorneys than I've ever seen in my life, from having to meet with these people about getting jobs for us so we could at least get one job. Now the jobs was limited to us. We had about 30 or 40 guys starting. Well, everybody couldn't take off their job. So some of the guys didn't last because they had to go in, jobs was limited. We didn't have very much time. So some guys dropped out along the way, and we all understood. The ones of us who was truly dedicated and could kind of, switch our jobs and, had flexibility in our time, we stayed with it and we kind of made a semi-career of it. And Willie was one of the forefront runners. See, Willie was an imposing guy, and he didn't care about me. Willie was not a very easily intimidated kind of guy. Let me say one thing about Willie Harris. This was a dedicated guy. I love Willie Wright so much right now because he did not only dedicate himself to the stunt world and equal rights and justice for stunts. Willie was a veteran in the Air Force. A lot of those veterans didn't. I'm gone away. What happened? Am I still here?
You're good?
Okay. Am I back? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Willie, a lot of the veterans were not getting what they needed to get and their disability. Willie went to Washington a lot of times and spoke up for people he didn't even know about veterans. Willie became an advocate for veterans here in Los Angeles and other places when they didn't know how to get the proper retirement, the proper benefits they had. That was just Willie's way. If someone needed something, Willie would take it out of his own pocket. I'm really sorry that Willie's gone, but his memories would last a long way in his business because our group is dwindling, and Willie was a very inspirational kind of guy with both the veterans, motion picture business, stunt association, Black Stuntmen Men and Women's Association, that we would be truly dedicated for his efforts. And with Eddie, Willie, myself, Ernie Robinson, William up there. I'm just calling out a few names. And women names, I had to make mention of the fact that Jada David and Evelyn Coffey was one of our original people, women in the group that came along with us. And, we just kind of at 80 years old. Willie was born, I was born in July, and Willie was born in August. So I'm about a month older than Willie. So I'll be 82 in July, and Willie would have been 82. But I'm saying I will truly be, Willie will truly be missed in the efforts and dedication he had toward, I had to say, veterans and our stunt group.
Thank you so much, Alex. I know you have to run because while you were a very successful and accomplished stuntman and your story is now told in the Smithsonian, the price you have to pay is that you go to the doctor almost every day for your back and your knees and everything else. So I know that's where you're headed now, but thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, I really do appreciate you all, Tim, and the panel and everyone else. I wish I had more time to elaborate a little bit more, but I really appreciate the time. Tim, I love you for Willie. I love you for myself. I hope we make plenty of money off of this book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
To all the women that's there on Women's History Month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tim, we heard just briefly that Willie Harris is growing up on a sharecropping farm in Mississippi, and now we hear he becomes president of the Black Stuntmen's Association, and there were so many obstacles along the way. A big theme of the book is segregation and the separate laws for Black people and white people in Mississippi, Chicago, Hollywood. Tell us some about how that affected Willie's life.
Sure. I think it was really a thread that ran through his life, and because of that, and because of all the other interviews I did with people who are featured in the book, it's really a thread that runs through the book. And there's so many kind of ways to look at it. There's so many different angles. On the one hand, I think that a lot of people who don't live in the South look at the South as the bad place, where segregation occurred and where they were so terrible to blacks. And what the problem with that is that I think that gives a lot of people who are not Southerners this unwarranted, smug self-confidence that they live in some kind of racially inclusive nirvana, which isn't true of any part of the country. And so there was segregation, there is segregation all over the country, it's just in different forms. The difference was that in the South, it was actually the law, and it was very structured in the South up till the Civil Rights Act of 1965. So when he was growing up in Mississippi, he was very angry, and he was a very proud person. He knew he was a very charismatic person. He had a lot of friends. He knew he was a great athlete. He was a tremendous basketball player. And he was just very keenly aware of the injustice of what his life was like versus what all the white kids' life was like. And then when he got to Chicago, he was there for a year. That was kind of, a little better. But it's because, you could actually go into movie theaters and restaurants, and black and white people would be there. And it wasn't segregated. But you still had to live in your part of the town, and that was all, carefully planned as well. Just not as overt as it might have been in the South. And then he gets to Hollywood, and it's kind of the same thing all over again. I mean, the only part of his life that he really didn't experience a lot of overt racism was when he was in the Air Force. But, one thing that I tried to get across in the book and I wasn't, planning on this being something that permeates the book, because I really went into this project with very little knowledge of the South, of Willie's life, of mid-20th century America. So I really learned it all through my interviews and my research. And one of the things that everyone kept bringing up, even if they didn't say it specifically, was this feeling of, we're considered less than. You are, because of the color of your skin, you are less important, you are inferior, whatever that means. I don't know how you even define inferior and superior human beings, but it was just maddening to them that they had to deal with this. And Willie was the type of person who would not, take very well to it and got very angry. And so really, I think when people think about segregation, they have these sort of like images in their head. They have images of like protest marches and, the police sicking German Shepherds on black protesters and all these sort of like big moments. And really what I hope people get from the book is just that day-to-day, minute-to-minute feeling of you're less important, and it's simply because of the color of your skin. And there was one story that I heard in my research that really stuck with me, and it had to do with when you think about segregation, the term itself sounds like segregation. There's this part and there's this part. You either get this, which is better, or you get this, which is worse. But what happens a lot of times is that this part that you get if you're black means you don't get anything. It's not like you get something less. It means you just don't have it. So for a lot of the train stations, some of them wouldn't have any restrooms for blacks to use at all. So I heard this woman telling this story, and imagine you're about an 8 or 10-year-old girl, and think about what your mother means to you at that point. Your mother's like a superhero. She does everything for you. She takes care of you. She feeds you. She gives you support and inspiration. And so you're traveling with, this young woman is telling this story 60 years later, now that she's an elderly woman. You're traveling with your mother on a train in the South, and you stop at a train station, and you get out, and your mother's dressed very nicely. You're going to visit family. And because of the color of her skin, you watch the white women going into the restroom. Your mother has to go out into the field and relieve herself in the field. And you think about the fact that you are a member of this society that treats your mother that way with no respect and no dignity. And you're still thinking about it 60 years later. Just think about how that would affect someone. And that's a daily thing.
I learned so much about American history from reading your book, and I grew up in the South, but the history that we were being taught was as though the bad things that happened were in the distant past, and that was something that really was brought home by reading your book. Like, I didn't understand the economics of sharecropping and how this worked and how this was continuing. When Willie grew up in the 1960s, I thought this was something that was happening in the 1870s and had stopped a long time ago. Could you just share briefly, for other people who, like me, have been ignorant of the economics of sharecropping, where it's not an explicitly racist law, but it's a structurally racist economic outcome coming out of this?
Yeah, so it really is just sort of an evolution from slavery. So in the South, you had plantations owned by whites and black slaves who worked on the plantations and lived on the plantations. So when slavery ended, this new system of sharecropping came around. And sharecropping, it was a new system for the United States South. It had been around since ancient Egypt. Sharecropping is not a new concept. But the idea is that I own the land. I am the former master of the plantation. Now I'm the owner of the plantation. I own the land. I'm going to give you this plot of land. You farm the land. You grow the crop. When the crop comes up, we'll sell the crop. You get half. I get half. That's where the word share comes from. You get your share, I get my share. Well, the reality is most of the black sharecroppers, or many of them anyway, were illiterate, and it wouldn't have mattered if they were literate or not because they didn't have any power. So the master or the owner could say, well, actually, I'm not going to give you anything this year because I had to pay for your children to go to the doctor, and I had to give you these tools, and they make up all these reasons. And so it was almost the epitome of living hand to mouth. And they didn't want, all the white people didn't want any of the blacks to leave. So there was actually fear about leaving, at least through the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then really what happened is when, but the Great Migration was going on, but then when, mechanical cotton harvesting machines and all of these things came into play in the 50s and 60s, then all the jobs just kind of went away. And then the blacks really left in droves even more.
Yeah, and just to hear about Willie growing up, working in the cotton fields when white kids his age were going to school, I found this so poignant, and I didn't know this was happening. We're going to watch a short video and hear Willie talking about his life in Mississippi. Tell us what we're going to see.
Sure, this is sort of like a little teaser for the book. And what you're going to see is Willie and his brother Robert a little bit, but mostly Willie talking about living in Mississippi in the 1940s and 50s. And there were only 2 photographs of Willie from his youth, and they're both in there. So I really had to look for other photos. And thankfully, I found at the Library of Congress this sort of treasure trove of photographs, which thanks to the internet you can narrow down. So I found Library of Congress photographs from 1940s, okay, narrowed it down to Mississippi, narrowed it down to his county. So the photos you're going to be seeing are from his day, from his county, of people working in the fields and being in school. And the reason why we have these photos is because a woman named Marion Post Walcott, who worked for the Farm Security Administration, which was a United States government agency that was set up to combat rural poverty during the Depression, she traveled around the country and took photos of poor people. And we're so thankful she did, because if she didn't do it, we probably wouldn't have all of these amazing photos of Depression-era people. And she only did it for 4 years. And can you guess why she stopped doing it at a young age? Because she had to go home and raise a family, and she couldn't be traveling around the country taking photos, but we're very glad that she did. So.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?
From sun up to sundown. There wasn't no certain hours. Sun up to sundown. Light, you worked. I started helping my mom them chop cotton when I was 6 or 7. You get up in the morning and go out in the cotton field, and it's wet from the night's dew, and that cotton is over your head. And it would be cold too, but you had to do it.
How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in sand?
I used to watch my stepfather and my mother. They worked all year long, and come to the end of the year, they didn't get anything. The man told them that they owed money instead of getting money.
The most money we getting from sharecropping was $460 for a whole damn year.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
We went to school. We wasn't supposed to go to school. The man didn't want us going to school because he knew if you got any type of education, you wasn't going to accept that for a long period of time. We'd go to work in the morning time and change over to school clothes and go to school and come back and go back to work. The only day we didn't work was on a Sunday.
The teacher was black. They would talk about the only two ways to get you out of there, being a musician or playing sports was the two easiest way to get out. The education was the third way to get out. And they would tell you about their parents and how some of the people that they knew got out. And I would listen because I was very miserable and angry when I was growing up.
And how many years must a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? And how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free?
What I couldn't figure out is how you go to church, you're Baptist, whether you're black or white, you pray to the same God, but this God tells you if you're white, you're better than us. I could never figure that out. Because I used to ask my mom, what did we do for God to hate us so bad? And she would tell me that it wasn't God, it was the people.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
The white people would pick on you, and they would say, come here, nigga, fetch me this or fetch me that. And you know, you may be sitting there talking to somebody, and they would say, hey, nigga boy, come over here. And it was just plain humiliation. And you better not say anything. You better smile and say, yes, sir, mister. And you were just completely handicapped. And I was just boiling with rage that one of these days I'm going to get my opportunity to whoop one of these white dudes' ass.
And how many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry?
You have to be careful because you can get killed quick, and it's not your fault.
My mom was afraid for me that I was the one that would speak out because she thought that if I didn't get out of there, I might wind up being killed. It really wasn't about the police in a lot of cases because the white people was the police. I never forget, he said, nigga, are you calling me a lie? And he went under the counter and he got a gun. And he reversed the chambers and put a bullet in there and said, I'll blow your damn brains out.
Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died?
I will not survive staying here. I got to get out of here. I don't know when or how, but I got to go.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
For that. It's so powerful to hear his voice and see these pictures. Who was singing this song?
That was our daughter, Carly Shea. She's sitting right over there.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim, so Willie served in the Air Force for 4 years in the 60s. Tell us a little bit about how that affected him.
Sure. So I'd say that was probably the most surprising part of his life, besides probably meeting the men of and women of the Black Summit Association. So he had played a year of college basketball, and then he had left school, and he was looking to play with another school, but the Vietnam War was starting. And the amount of American troops going was escalating, and so he knew back in his hometown, and all of his friends in his town told me that all the young black men were being put on a list to be recruited, and many fewer of the young white men had to go to serve. So he knew, he went to town hall, and they said, you're going to be drafted into the Army. So he was very savvy, and he talked to some friends, and he found out that they had really good basketball teams, very competitive teams in the Air Force. So instead of getting drafted into the Army, he enlisted in the Air Force. And when he got to the Air Force, it was the first time he'd ever slept in the same room with white people, it was the first time he'd, eaten with white people. The armed forces were desegregated in 1948. This was 1962 when he got to the Air Force. So it was really eye-opening for him. His two best friends in the Air Force were two young white men. And so he was like, wow, he grew up his whole life telling me, honestly, I hated white people. No one had ever been kind to me. And he got to the Air Force, and on top of that, he met a white woman who was English, who he married. And, at this time, it was illegal in 17 U.S. states until 1967 Supreme Court decision for blacks and whites to get married. And he got married in New Mexico because he couldn't have gotten married in Mississippi. It was illegal. And the fact that he married an English woman from England was actually significant because there were probably very few white women in 1964 in America who would even consider, marrying a black man at the time. But there wasn't the same level of racism in England. And she told him that when she came over, that she knew a bunch of American GIs over there in London, and the American GIs would tell the English girls, watch out for the black American soldiers, because they're like monkeys, and after dark, their tails come out. And so the English girls would look at the black soldiers after dark to see if their tails come out. And so, as you know, persuasion can be used for good or evil. And so, she wasn't a racist person, but just that's the kind of thing that sort of permeates our society. So he ended up getting a lot of injuries from his Air Force service, which debilitated him for the rest of his life, and that's a big part of the story. But really, the Air Force service, as Alex also talked about, his concern for other Air Force vets, it was really an important part of his life that I think he was really glad that he went through.
Yeah, this part of the story is moving and unexpected. And so the story is called Big Man, and there were a number of powerful women that influenced Willie in his life, and continue with the theme of Women's History Month as well. Can you tell us about some of them?
Sure. So I think we really need to start with his mother. So his mother, Evie Harris, was born in 1900. I remember Willie wasn't born until 1941. She was 41 when he was born, and she was 40 when his older brother Robert was born. And she was, for her younger life, she worked, in the kitchen of a plantation house. But then she became a sharecropper just like him. And, so when he's 15, she's already in her late 50s. And she's out there in the field 12 hours a day from can to can't, which means when you can see until you can't see. And, she was just the one to guide him and say, you need to keep your head. And it was really hard for him. You need to keep your head down. You need to get off the sidewalk. If white people are on the sidewalk, you can never, ever look a white woman in the eye. You always say yes, sir, and yes, mister, if you're ever talking to a white man. And so she really kept him in control, but you could hear from the things that he said in the video how really angry he was about the situation. And then we also have many other important women, but Bernadine Anderson is someone who, she was the first black woman this sounds crazy when you think about hairstylist and makeup guild. It's a union in Hollywood. They do work on all the Hollywood productions. She was the first black woman in the hairstylist and makeup guild, but not just the first black woman, she was the first woman, okay? And because it was a well-paying job, there were 200 members of the union in 1971 when she joined. They were all white men doing all the makeup and hairstyles in Hollywood. And Jane Fonda said, I want a person of color to be my makeup person. And she became Jane Fonda's personal makeup person throughout the 1970s, through all the movies that she did. And so if you think about Jane Fonda, just as another example, and this is really an example of just how white male-dominated our society and our culture has been, Jane Fonda, you think about her as being super liberal, super woman power, that kind of thing. I looked it up. She was in 47 movies from 1960 to 2018, so that's 58 years. Jane Fonda was in 47 movies. All 47 movies were directed by men, and 45 out of the 47 were directed by white men. You wouldn't think about that with Jane Fonda. And then we go to Marge Ryan Krieger. She was a young white woman who was in law school in the 60s. When she came out of law school, she was very idealistic, and she worked for the EEOC, as Alice was talking about, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and she's like lifelong friends with the Black Stuntmen now because she stuck with them. She went to court against all the major studios on behalf of the EEOC, and she got them justice, she got them jobs, she got them back pay for jobs they didn't get, that kind of thing. She was very, very inspiring too. It's really very much of an ally, as we would say.
Really inspiring. So Tim, tell us, what do you hope Willie's legacy will be? What do you want to accomplish with this story?
Well, I think about it sort of in three ways. One is, I think people who read the book, the first impression you get of Willie is that he's this 6'8" giant of a man with a big booming voice and very forceful. But he was really a very sweet person with a huge heart. And I think anyone who reads the book and gets to the end and reads the chapter about how he met his granddaughter for the first time when she was in her 20s. He didn't even know she existed. He found out he had a granddaughter, and he just, you know, sometimes when you have awkward family dynamics like that, people just kind of like turn away. He embraced her like you wouldn't believe, and he was a safe harbor for her, and they just had just amazing relationship for the last 5 or 6 years of his life. And the other thing is, he was a real fighter. Like, he would be asked to speak sometimes to youth groups, and he would say, you know, if you get knocked down, get back up. If you get knocked down a second time, get up again. If you're Black, you're going to have to work twice as hard, but just keep your head down and keep going. And, you know, he reminds me of this quote from Muhammad Ali, who said, impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who would rather live the lives they've been given than explore the power they have to change them. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. And I think that's sort of how he viewed life. He just never gave up. He just kept, and he didn't always succeed, but he just kept going and going and going. And really sort of the last thing that I hope this book can do is almost be kind of a seed for these kinds of stories, you know, because I think I would compare this to a couple of other things that have happened in our country, or really in the world, in the last 20 or 30 years. And that is, you know, we had all of the World War II veterans dying off sort of near the turn of the century, and it was very rightly so. There was this big movement to record their stories and to capture their stories before they're all gone. And we have the same kind of thing with the Holocaust survivors. And all of that is absolutely necessary, both of those cases. But I don't feel like there is that kind of interest in stories about people who survived segregation. And I think it's because it's such a negative and embarrassing part of our history, but it's not like it's ancient history. You know, the ideas that created the system of segregation, they're still with us. They get passed down from generation to generation. It's just in a different form. And it's precisely because it's such a terrible part of our history that we need to remember it, and we need to acknowledge the people who, and listen to their stories. I mean, I was blessed to be able to, Willie would tell all of his friends, talk to Tim, you know, I'm sure they're probably thinking, who's this guy who's calling me, asking me about my life story? Talk to Tim, he's a good guy, just tell him everything. And it was a real gift for me to be able to do that and to hear all these stories and to record all of them.
Thank you. It's such a gift for us that you did that. You get an idea of how painstakingly, carefully researched this book is and how lovingly written it has been. And I encourage you, if you haven't read the book yet, to pick it up. You'll really enjoy it. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you so much. Now, for something fun.
And now, go ahead. Now we're going to transition to Professor Elijah Anderson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Martindale, and I am the event specialist here at the Office of Inclusion and Diversity at SOM, and I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Elijah Anderson. Elijah Anderson is the Sterling Professor of Sociology and of African American Studies at Yale University, and one of the leading urban ethnographers in the United States. He is the author of numerous award-winning books, and his most recent work is Black and White Space: The Enduring Impact of Color in Everyday Life, published by the University of Chicago Press in 22. Publishers Weekly called the book a penetrating ethnographic study a fine-grained portrait of how systematic racism operates. His many academic honors include being the recipient of the American Sociological Association's 2018 W.E.B. Du Bois Career of Distinguished Scholarship Award and the 2021 Robert and Helen Lynn Award for Lifetime Achievement. He is also the 2021 winner of the Stockholm Prize in Criminology, the world's most prestigious prize in the field of criminology. Everyone, welcome Professor Elijah Anderson.
Thank you.
Thanks, Enoch.
Yes. Great. Thank you, and thank you. Thank you for having me. I love this book. And I think the story is told lovingly. It's very powerful, and strongly recommend it. I think that from the story, we have to kind of think about what happened next, in a way, because this certainly isn't the end of the story, for sure. And Willie and I have so much in common. I was born in the Mississippi Delta during the war, and my family sharecroppers. And my dad went to the war, fought in World War II in England and France, and came back, and like Willie, determined that he couldn't live in the South anymore. He was either going to hurt somebody or somebody was going to hurt him. And the North beckoned, the factory jobs in the North beckoned. And my dad had a 4th grade education. My mother had an 11th grade education. I was 2 at the time, and they moved to South Bend, Indiana. And he got a job at the Studebaker foundry. My uncles were in South Bend. Part of the Great Migration to the North. And I was raised right in South Bend. I was a precocious kid. I read early, and the teachers would put me in front of the kids and have me read to other kids and that kind of thing, which didn't win me many friends. In fact, I became marginal all my life, I guess. But I tried to fit in, and became something of a leader in some ways, and I was a delinquent kid for a while. Set pins at a bowling alley, snuck in movie theaters, all kinds of things like that. Would organize some of the boys to go to white neighborhoods and rake leaves, shovel snow, or even Christmas carol for money, that kind of thing. My mother called me money crazy. Tried to sanction me. At a certain point, my daddy left, and I became the man of the household, in a sense. Middle child, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. But I began to fend for myself and became a pin setter at a bowling alley in South Bend when I was 12, 11 and a half. Sold newspapers for the South Bend Tribune. I loved the streets. But if you know anything about bowling and pins, as a pin boy, your fingers get sprung and you damage your hands and that kind of thing. So I needed a better job. And so I canvassed the city of South Bend and came across Mr. Forbes one night, a man who owned a typewriter store. And he was open late. I went in. I said, you need some help? He said, what can you do? I said, well, I can do whatever these other boys do. I see them in here. Where do you live? I live on the west side where the black people were concentrated. When can you work? After school on Saturdays. I go to the high school down the street. I was a junior high school student at the time. And he hired me for 50 cents an hour. This man owned the typewriter store, Mr. Forbes. And I worked there from the time I was 12 until the time I graduated high school. And as a my first real contact with white people. I knew his family. I knew his sons, grandchildren. And it's just an amazing, eye-opening experience for me. Ultimately, the civil rights movement started. And many of you are too young to know about the civil rights movement, how it happened and all. But I experienced it right there in that shop. In fact, Martin Luther King came to our town, to our church, and my mother met him. And, it all started with Rosa Parks in 1955 she was a seamstress in the South, in Montgomery, and she refused to go to the back of the bus, took a seat in the front. The bus driver called the police. She was arrested for sitting in the front of the bus, and that started the modern civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was 26 years old. He took over the movement. The men in town, they boycotted the bus company. It brought the bus company in the city to its knees. And they finally allowed black people to ride in front of the bus. This was a very important victory. It kicked off the civil rights movement. And I'm leaving stuff out. You have to watch Eyes on the Prize if you can watch this. You really should watch it. 6 episodes. I have my students watch it. Very important to watch this movement unfold. This movement culminated in riots, civil disorders, and minor rebellions all over the country. Between 1964 and 1968, city after city after city after city after city after city burned in this country. Seriously. And then when Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, I remember that day, April 1968, all hell broke loose. It seemed like the whole country was on fire, And people like Lyndon Johnson, who was the president, made a speech and said, "We will overcome. We will overcome. We shall overcome." And he and the Congress began to initiate all kinds of social legislation that would make black people full citizens of this country. It's very important for you to appreciate this, because at that time, the country was utterly segregated. And the kinds of things that Willie is talking about, that was real, palpable, you see. Because of all this violence and all this fire burning and all that, the business community, the universities, the government, Republicans and Democrats decided that they needed to do something, you see. At the same time, the Cold War was going on. The Cold War was going on between this country and the West and the Soviet Union. It's very important. Because at the same time, many colonized countries were demanding independence. Self-determination, they called it. And they were winning it. And they were deciding which way to go, whether to follow the West or to follow the Soviet Union. And as Willie's story points out, America didn't look very good. Black people couldn't vote. Couldn't vote. And discrimination was rampant. And you see a lot of spaces today with black people there. This wasn't true then. And so to make America appear like America, the Republicans and the Democrats had to change. They had to allow black people to vote. Something that simple. And so Johnson signed the 1965 Voting Acts right. Major. Allowed black people to vote. And Johnson said when he signed this legislation, he said, there goes the South. And all these Democrats in the South who were white and racist, they became Republicans. You see? But black folk got the vote. And it changed the face of the South in terms of who the sheriff was going to be and who the mayor was going to be and who the congressman was going to be and all this and that, you see. This is important. So on the heels of the civil rights movement, affirmative action as a policy, equal opportunity legislation, you know, public accommodation, school integration. All these things were happening because of this progress, racial progress, you see. And I call it in my book, the racial incorporation process. That's what it was. And so, as a black person in that day and time, you couldn't be on an elevator in a building downtown with a suit and tie on without people grabbing you and say, you want a job? You want a job? You want a job? Suddenly, this was like the second Reconstruction, and a premium was placed on black skin for the second time in history, first time being slavery. Second Reconstruction. And so we had the racial incorporation process, which produced what you see today. You look around, I see black and brown people in this audience. This couldn't be when I was coming up. All the result of this racial incorporation process, inspired by the people who dealt with these issues, like Willie, you know, the anger that he expressed that you talked about, you know. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. This is what they said. And so we had more and more justice. Immigration laws changed. Before, they would take people, encourage people from Northwestern Europe, almost exclusively. With the changes that were brought about because of these new developments, they began to encourage people to come from Southeastern Europe, you know, Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and other places. And all of this gave a peculiar cast to the city, if you will. I write about this in my book, The Cosmopolitan Canopy. I discovered in my work in Philadelphia that there was such a place as the Cosmopolitan Canopy, this island of racial civility located in a sea of segregation. Philadelphia is the sixth most segregated city in the country. And yet, you can find these cosmopolitan canopies like the Reading Terminal Market, like Rittenhouse Square, and other places. These islands of racial civility where black people and white people and all kinds of people get along. And it's located in a sea of racial segregation because this is left over from the days of Willie, you know. Yeah. And under the canopy, I'm an ethnographer, so I watch people and write about people, you see. Written 5 books, you know, Place on the Corner, Streetwise, Code of the Street, the cosmopolitan canopy, and this is my 5th book, Black and White Space. Under the canopy, there are 2 kinds of people, essentially. People who are cosmopolitan, they're like everybody. The cosmos believe that I can become a better person by knowing somebody who's different from myself, and is happy about that. And under the canopy, the cosmos dominate, you see. The other type of people are the ethnocentrics. The ethnocentrics. And these people tend to come from parochial environments, you see. And they come to the canopy too, but they keep their ethnocentrism in check, because they don't want to let it out because they feel embarrassed, so they're constrained. And so they act real nice. They're in the canopy, but they act real nice until they don't. And when they don't, it means they've had it. They reached their limits. And you can be of any color and be an ethnocentric. And you can be of any color and be a cosmopolitan. The ethnocentrics tend to draw the color line, you see. They draw the color line. And when they draw the color line, they marginalize the black person, you see. But they also marginalize the gay person. They marginalize the Catholics. They marginalize the women. They marginalize anybody who's different, you see. Because they themselves come from more parochial environments. And you're not a person unless you look like me. Unless you're part of my tribe. That's what I found out in this book. The cosmopolitan can't read it. And I'm a serious ethnographer. So when I finished that, I began to look at other issues, and I began to look at, the result of this incorporation process, bringing black people into where? The white space. The white space. See? Who else? So what's interesting here is what black people go through as they navigate the white space. The white space is a perceptual category. Not the same thing to everybody, but it's dominated, by white people. The canopy can be a white space, And in the canopy, although it's a beautiful space, when a black person comes into the canopy, people assume that because of the skin, you come from the ghetto. It may not be true because black people come from everywhere. Middle class for 5 generations, whatever. But if you got this black skin, people under the canopy, especially the ethnocentrics, they assume that you're from the hood, you see? And they draw the color line, and they give you what I found out in my book, the deficit of credibility. The deficit of credibility. In other words, as you navigate the white space, quote unquote, as a black person, you're burdened with this negative presumption that you must neutralize or disprove in order to establish trusting relations with other people in that space. Not just white people. These can be anybody. Because once they're in the white space, you come in as a black person, are you from the hood? They check you out. And so you say, no, I'm not from the hood. Well, prove it. Or you dance. There's a whole chapter about the deficit of credibility and the dance. And the dance is to disabuse people of the notion that their ghetto stereotypes apply to you personally. And this is how people navigate the white space. I know. Because I was born, like you say, at the very bottom of the order on a plantation, you know. And slavery as an institution, underscore this, slavery established the black body at the bottom of the order. You could not have been worse than a black person during slavery. I mean, Justice Taney said in 1857, he said, black people have no rights that white people are bound to respect. Dred Scott decision, you know. And he was commenting about what the order was at that day and time. But as black people were released, emancipated, as they migrated north and passed through this village or that town, people said, keep on going. And once in a while they stopped and settled on the outskirts of these white towns, you see. And the communities grew, and it became this symbiotic relationship between these villages and the white towns. And these black towns grew, became the black section of town, became the early hood, you see. And sometimes the white folks lit them up, like Tulsa, Lorraine, Arkansas. Many other places where the black people settled were burned to the ground. I'm not making this up. You see, because the place of the hood, you know, the idea of the hood, the idea of the ghetto, the idea of the ghetto is no longer just a physical space. It's become iconic. Iconic. And so it's in the air, it's ambient. If you're black, you're from the hood first. And you've got to prove that these stereotypes do not apply to you. That's the situation that we deal with right now. And there's no sense sugarcoating it, because, you know, it's true. And you have to understand, too, that for the cosmos, there are many of these people around. The cosmopolitans, white, black, whoever, they're like everybody, you know, kind of thing. But the cosmopolitans under pressure, great pressure right now. Great pressure right now. Irving Goffman, famous sociologist, wrote a book called Stigma. And in this book, and based on his analysis of black-white relations, he produced a typology. I'm going to finish, we can have a conversation. He produced a typology. And in this typology, he spoke about race relations. He said, well, and stigma. He said, well, there's the own, O-W-N, own kind. And these are the people who are stigmatized and have a hard way to go. They got it bad. And then there are the normals. These are the white people who typically are oblivious to anything that black people might be going through. So you got these two groups, he said. But then you got a middle group. A middle group, he called them the wise. The wise. And the thing that distinguishes the wise is that they have the capacity to empathize with the own, the O-W-N. They know what the own is going through, you see. For whatever reason, they understand and they try to help. These are the allies that we talk about. With all due respect, this is a wise man. And his book hopefully will make you wise, if you will, because you will appreciate perhaps what a man like Willie Harris went through. You see, what I go through. I mean, I'm not completely nuts. I deal with it like most black folk deal with it, if you know what I mean. It's part of the black tax. The black tax is what you expect to pay for doing ordinary things in America and being black at the same time. And you can't complain because you would go nuts. You just hope it's not too bad. The black tax. And you feared to pay the black tax in the school, in the university. Even when your plumber comes to your house, electrician, you hope that he's not going to hold you, if he's white, you hope he's not going to give you the black tax. This is all in my book. It's all in the book. It's in paperback, and you can get it also in audiobook. And it's a very clear, in my mind, not because I wrote it, but it's a clear description and analysis of what black folk are going through right now. And it picks up on a number of the issues that you raised in your book. And I really appreciate his book. It's just really a wonderful book. I'll stop there. I could talk for another hour, but I'm going to stop now and open this up to conversation and questions. And I got a thick skin, so you can ask me anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for articulating so well, both of you, what is a lived experience for so many of us that we cannot communicate to our allies, to our loved ones. I thought you were going to say the third category, sir, not wise, but there is also a group of Black people that, in a way, terrorize the lowest form of the ghetto people. And I keep thinking immediately, there was a school administrator who was very light-skinned, as part of, I found out doing background research, part of a sorority that saw me at a gas station that was near her home. And she almost fell backwards seeing me at that gas station because it was her area and I was in my X3M. How could that be possible if my son is in a New Haven school and she is now living in Woodbridge but going to a church in the hood? And I keep finding this piece over and over again. Second point, which I think is really important.
Can I address
that? Yeah, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Because the book, see, what I introduce in this book is this concept of symbolic racism, you see. And symbolic racism is peculiarly equal opportunity.
Okay.
When I was coming up as a student, in my student days, we just thought, white people, racism, white racism. Even the Kerner Commission report, if you go back and read that, they said white racism was the cause of these riots, and all that. But see, we've evolved in a certain way to this notion of symbolic racism. It was always there, but it's really become acute in this moment, I think. Because the symbolic racism is peculiarly equal opportunity, and it rests on the idea of the iconic ghetto, you see. where the black folk live. And you notice when I said that the challenge for the black person as he or she navigates the white space is this negative presumption that he or she must disprove or neutralize before building trusting relations with others in that space. You see, not just white people, but anybody else who's in that space. You see, so it's a symbolic racism centered on the icon of the ghetto, and the ghetto is not just a physical space. It's become iconic, is what I'm saying. This is why the New York Times the other day, they had this article about how racism seeps into any transaction that black people make about buying a house. And the point is, I mean, don't mention my book, but the point is that this racism has become symbolic. And every black person needs to prove his or her distance from the ghetto in order to be respectable, you see. But you carry this deficit of credibility that you've got to work on in order to get. So yes, black people can be that way too. I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but.
No. Are you familiar with Professor Thomas Duffy, either one of you? School of Music. He had done a commission for CBS News back in the 70s. He had Walter Cronkite come in to read a piece from W.E. Du Bois. And I can't find the actual link, but the piece by W.E. Du Bois that they put music to, the Yale band, starts out reading about the black man, black person, being 2/3 of a person versus a whole person. That was back to the voting rights. And I don't hear that spoken about when I go to other places, but this white man, Thomas Duffy, he was celebrating his 40th anniversary as a professor at Yale, brought that out. And if black people are not full American citizens, anything we do is not going to be enough unless we say, what are you? I'm an American. How many black people actually feel that they are Americans?
Well, I hope to say I'm American.
I'm Trinidadian, so I'm Trinidadian, I'm okay.
One thing I didn't say in my talk, and this is important for a takeaway here, is that right at the present time, there's what I would call the white backlash to all this progress that's been made, you know. And it's a very serious backlash. Even when the incorporation process was happening, there were many, many white people who supported it. You know, it couldn't have happened without the political support of many, many white people. But at the same time, there were white people who felt that their own rights were being abrogated, you know, by the inclusion of black people, you see. And that was a minority then, but that group has grown in political power and influence since that day. And right now, they've turned Goffman's typology into, I talked about the wise, the own, and the normal. They call the wise people the woke people now, you see, in a disparaging way. They call the wise the woke right now, you see. And think about that turnaround of terms, if you will. You know, the wise. The wise people are empathetic. They understand what people who, not just blacks, but anybody who's marginalized is going through. They're empathetic. But now that term wise has been wrested away and turned into this epithet, you see, that is truly disparaging, if you will. And of course, if you look at Jackson, Mississippi, to go back to your point right now as we speak, they're reinstituting Jim Crow.
That's right, yeah.
If you don't believe me, Google Jackson, Mississippi, and read about what is happening before our very eyes. And not just in Jackson, but other places around the country. So there's always this backlash that we're talking about. You know, this is another big backlash after the second Reconstruction. After the first Reconstruction, you know, you all from your history books, you know about Rutherford B. Hayes, right? He was the president in 1876, and it was a disputed election. And the Democrats allowed him to, the old Democrats, not the new ones, to be president on the condition that he would take, you know, the Union troops out of the South and leave the South to its own devices. So he did this to get the presidency, and the emerging Southerners then, you know, turned the clock back. Sharecropping, the black codes, all these things that Jim Crow, that was the result. That was the first big setback. And now we have a setback right now because we've had this incorporation process that has produced the largest black middle class in American history. Black people are everywhere today. They're professors at Yale, you know. I mean, the old days, I mean, during Reconstruction, they were congressmen and senators, black people, before Rutherford B. Hayes was elected, if you know what I mean. So they turned that back, and now you've got people trying to turn this progress back, if you will. I don't want to go on, but I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
I had a question about your book.
Sure.
There's a part of the book where you illustrate how white people can operate in and outside of black and white spaces without that deficit of credibility. Yeah. Whereas blacks, where people of color are kind of forced to operate in white spaces.
Yes.
So as I was reading that, I was like, you know, my brain started turning, and I was like, that can't be. There has to be spaces where blacks can operate and choose to operate in only black spaces.
Yeah.
And as I kept thinking about that, I kept coming back to the systems there, whereas the police are used as instruments, so that even if you decide to stay in the ghetto, the police are used to then go into these ghettos and harass, subsequently arrest black people, and then they in turn get put into the justice system, which we all know is a very white space, and where that stigma of the iconic ghetto is used very heavily. The question I wanted to ask was, do you think that we can ever get to a point where, as African Americans, people of color, we can move around in other spaces without that stigma of ghetto or that credibility issue?
The point I was making in that passage is that that white people typically avoid black space.
And even when they do decide to go into black spaces, you mentioned the part where there were some social workers that were working in Philadelphia, and when they got pulled over by the police because they were white, they were suspected of maybe as buying drugs, but they weren't arrested. They were let go and then said, go on your way.
Right. Well, typically, white people avoid black space, but black people must navigate white space as a condition of their existence. And that's the key. That's key, you see. And with respect to the backlash, you can imagine, and I'm not against all police, don't get me wrong. I mean, I got friends who are policemen and all that. But you can picture the police as the vanguard of this backlash, because they have the guns and they have the arbitrary power to deal with miscreants or criminals, if you know what I mean.
the gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers of a sort. And so you look at these videos that come out now and then on social media about a black person being killed or harassed or whatever it is, and you see the contorted visage of the policeman as he stops this person for a taillight, you know, which doesn't fit. I mean, this contorted visage, he's so angry, mad, and this person's possible crime is a broken taillight. And so you see this vanguard and the killings that keep on happening. Every other day, it seems to be another black male or female, you know, being killed by the police, you know. And then we had the Memphis situation where, you know, you had black cops doing that. And I racked my brain. And I remembered this line from NWA. You know, and I don't know if you listen to NWA, but
Oh, definitely.
at the gym, I mean, I'm just, you know. I was on a one Sunday morning, and I was just going to town, and a black fellow passed by. He said, "What are you listening to?" And I said, "You don't want to know." He looked like a minister, you know. And he said, "No, tell me, what you listen to?" I said, "F the police." I felt so bad saying that, but I missed it the rest of the day. But there's a line in that video, in that song, which says, "Let it not be a black or white cop stopping you, because the black police show out for the white cop," you know, which is a very interesting formulation, if you will, but it's complicated. But a lot of this rap music is really deep, you know, in its way. These are smart people who come up with this poetry, and a lot of them are not even from the hood, you know. But that's another conversation. It's complicated, but yeah, no, this is a real issue, and I wrote this book. I mean, you have it out there. This is my analysis, but I invite criticism. I invite questions about it, because from those questions we learn more, if you will. So these questions that you raise are good, you know, and I appreciate any questions about any of this stuff.
We have a note from the chat. Willie's granddaughter has tuned in, and Amanda White, she says she wants to thank everyone who is here, and Grandpa would be so tickled to know that you all gathered for this event. She wishes that he was here to see it.
Well, I know we're out of time. I just want to really thank everyone for coming and for this opportunity, and especially the folks who stepped up to sponsor it. Marinda Momfelston, Tamika Hollis, Maya Martindale, everyone who sponsored it, from the Yale Veterans Network, the Yale Office of Inclusion and Diversity, Zanaya Leone. So thankful, because this wouldn't have happened without you. And for Zoë Chance.